On a night filled with smoke and battle, I was betrayed by a friend I once trusted, with a gun pointed at my head. It was in that moment I realized how fragile trust can be. Chapter 61, Making Everything Right. My breathing came out short and ragged. Around me, I could hear the sounds of James and the other wolf fighting. I could hear Raven climbing out of the ditch. The smell of smoke was thick in the air as the person standing before me advanced, gun in hand. My world came to a standstill just long enough for me to whisper one accusation. Bray. He shot me a frozen smile. His eyes were narrowed and slants wide as he stalked toward me. Though I scurried away, I didn't get far. Arms that I now knew belonged to Raven wound themselves around me, holding me in place. I didn't bother fighting her off. My attention was still focused on the man in front of me who was holding my fate in his hands. Bray tilted his head and the gun followed. Didn't expect to see me here. You humans are terribly naive. His smile turned into a glare when a loud snarl sounded. James had shifted into a wolf, and Al had the other pinned to the ground, teeth hovering over his neck. They were both panting, and for just a moment, the darker-colored wolf shifted his gaze to me. I saw Will's eyes within the beast, screaming at me to run, fight, or do anything to save myself. Raven's grip tightened. She locked my elbows and pushed my hands up, arching my back in a painful position. Mangled cries lingered in the back of my throat, a few escaping to pierce the silent night. After a moment, Bray turned his glare on me. You're not worth all this trouble. Will's wolf sprang forward, getting another few gashes along James before he was pinned down again. Peyton watched the encounter with tangible fury. And you? Bray turned to James Wolf, hovering over my brother. You can't do anything right. Always with the extra V, AG and Cs. Always with the games. Never able to deliver. While keeping his gaze trained on the pair of wolves, Bray began a slow walk toward me. Raven tensed and pulled me closer to her body, sending a spasm of pain throughout my limbs. I struggled in her grasp, but there was no fighting her strength. Soon enough, Peyton was standing before me, too close for comfort. He towered over my frame, when our chests were only inches apart. His gaze darted back to Raven and he smiled. She held me steady, long enough for Peyton to tilt his head and regard my shaking frame. How nice it is to have friends who have your back, isn't it? Samantha. Bray sneered and paused before his light eyes flickered to Raven. Despite my best judgment, you came through. Tu es agent extraordinaire, Madeline Noban. Heartfelt thanks for your unfading patience, enthusiasm. I have to say I am surprised. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeline Noban. Heartfelt thanks for your unfading patience, enthusiasm. I think I am not the only one. His smile grew wider, enhancing the glaciers supporting his expression. Tell me, Samantha, did you truly think it would be this easy? That everything you did simply worked in your favor? Or are you as stupid as Ravens told me? My heart fell out of my chest, and despite my best efforts, my gaze fell to the floor. Tears of betrayal stung more than just my eyes. I wanted to scream. I wanted to turn around and cuss Raven for ever letting me believe I could trust her kindness. That's what I thought. Break continued. What the hell do you want? I spat out, interrupting his monologue. Why do you even care about me? About her? Oh, I don't. This is not about you. You're just caught in the crossfire. Peyton lifted the gun to my head, letting the barrel rest against my temple. My neck tense as I drew in a quick breath. If this isn't about me, then let us go. We just want to leave without any troubles. I paused, trying to gain control of my trembling voice. If not me, then let Will go. He doesn't have to be a part of this. That's where you're wrong. Once more, he'll be coming back. My shoulders stiffened, pulling against Raven's grip. I don't understand. I know. He took the gun away from my temple to top of my head, shifting his eyes to Raven. Do not screw this up now. One of Raven's hands stretched forward, and Bray placed the gun in her palm. Without hesitation, she brought the barrel to my head. While this was happening, Bray backed away and bit in a purposeful walk to Wolves. He picked up a bundle of fabric on his way over, tossing the clothes next to James when he got close enough. Without another word, James retreated from Will. The minute Will tried to jump up from the ground, Peyton came around and kicked his head to the side. A terrified scream left my lips as his body went limp. James appeared moments later, glaring at Bray. I had it under control. Peyton's expression dark and his voice turned sinister. I could hear this encounter from miles away. You should consider yourself lucky I was the only one. End this. He nudged Will's snout with his foot. There is no ounce of control in this situation. You didn't let me finish. Bray moved faster than my eyes could follow. He was chest to chest with James in an instant, growling his words. I shouldn't have had to let you do anything. It was supposed to be taken care of. James took a deep breath but stepped down. His chest fell and he shuffled backward. Peyton seemed to grow taller with the distance put between them. Instead of having to face Bray, James turned to glare at me. He looked me up and down, eyes lingering on the blood coating my body. With just one glance, I felt symphonies of fire erupt from every wound. Without taking his eyes off of me, James spoke to Peyton. You have the boy. Let me finish her. Let me finish the deal. You know I can, or else you wouldn't have come to me in the first place. No, Bray placed himself between me and James. I came to you because you were my last resort. Now that I'm here, I will finish things the correct way. Taking a deadly step forward, I do not give second chances. The entire forest stilled with the implication of Peyton's words. The gun grew heavier against my head. James cowered and shuffled several feet away. Not a breath of air passed into anyone's lungs. Then, James stopped moving. A strange expression fell upon his face. He glanced at everyone in the clearing, muscles tensing with his intentions. Then, he charged. He leapt over Bray and shot toward me and Raven. I screamed as I was pushed forward just in time for Raven to dodge James' attack, however. She was not his target. And the minute my knees hit the dirt, the top half of my body slammed to the ground. James pulled back as he propelled over me, his momentum overtaking his control. As I sunk into the ground, he flew to the side, skidding to a halt on his knees. His body began to morph as bones cracked and an enraged howl left his lips. From the corner of my eye, I could see Raven taking small steps toward Bray, the gun hanging limply at her side. An expression of pure rage had befallen Peyton, but he made no move to stop James' assault. I felt him coming before I saw anything. Without waiting for an impact, I sprang from the floor and flew into Raven's arms. Her screams echoed my own and she jumped away, stumbling as I latched onto her ankles. She fell to the ground and the gun clattered next to her. The minute I reached for the metal, something sunk into my leg. I screamed in agony and my hands dug into the dust. Despite the pain, I scoured the floor for my saving grace, letting James' teeth dig deeper into my flesh. My legs kicked and flailed, ignoring the tremendous pain spraining from every limb of my body. By the time my hands grasped the gun, I knew that when I looked down, my legs would be no more. James dragged me toward him with his teeth. He was no longer a man, but a snarling beast stripping at any piece of me he could find. As he tore at my body, I forced myself onto my back. When the gun was steady, I didn't hesitate. I pulled the trigger. Again, and again, and again. The gunshots rang louder than my screams. Following its deafening echo was nothing more than a soft whisper of wind. The claws and teeth ripping away at me had ceased. A heavy weight had fallen upon the bottom half of my body. I was left panting, struggling for air amidst smoke and terror. And here I was, thinking you didn't have it in you. Peyton's voice was the thing that finally broke the silence. It was thick and dark, and I couldn't tell where it was coming from. I understand your desire to kill him. He was much too impulsive for me. I was going to do it myself after this ordeal was finished. Though my vision was dancing with black dots, Bray came into focus, standing next to me. My hands whipped to where he lingered, pointing the gun to his head. When I pulled the trigger, though, nothing happened. He came closer. My finger frantically pulled, again and again, shaking the gun to work. When he was close enough, Bray kicked the metal out of my grasp and crouched beside me. You should have saved a few bullets. Tears sprang from my eyes as panic began to ease into space where Renaulin escaped. I kicked at the dead weight upon my legs, but I was stuck underneath James Wolfe's carcass. There was no escaping. There was no running. And now, there was no fighting. I wish I could say I regret everything. Bray mused, a cold overtone hanging on every word he spoke. But I don't. Everything happened exactly as I planned. To my agent extraordinaire, my noble, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. I thought you might be an annoyance to what was to come, but here you are, making everything right. My mind was running on the last of its strength. Words tumbled out of my mouth before I knew what I was saying. It was a last desperate attempt to find some way to save my life. This isn't right. I panted, continuing my fight to push James off my body. None of this is right. You don't have to do this. On the contrary, this was how it was always supposed to be. I don't understand. My words were the loudest scream it cried yet. The words echoed trees, my panic traveling with them. Peyton growled and eyed the forest. He caught sight of Raven, standing motionless on the tree line. Without another glance my way, he stood and stalked over to her. Retrieve the boy. Raven stumbled over her feet, meeting my wide eyes for the first time that night. Her gaze paused on my broken body for only a moment. Are we leaving her? Bray stopped dead in his tracks. He eased his body back to face Raven, rage lining his expression. Are you questioning me? And no, she stuttered. If yours to do so, then my end of the bargain would expire. As well. Is that what you're doing? Raven stumbled toward Bray, clasping her hands in front of her. No, please. I'm not. He sent her a cold glare, quieting her words. Retrieve the boy. Raven disappeared from my sight. Bray turned back to me, a cool expression having replaced his earlier fury. Something long was glinting in his hands, and as he stepped toward me, I knew the end was near. I could already see his knife dripping with my blood. When he crouched beside me again, it was a surprise to feel the sharp end cut into my throat. Thank you for allowing me to set things right. Samantha. I will make this quick. He pushed the knife deeper into my skin. A scream echoed through the night, though after a moment, I realized it was not my own. Bray's knife was held stagnant against my neck as he whipped his gaze back to where Raven disappeared. When her cries sounded again, he dropped the blade and disappeared. I was left on the forest floor, bleeding out, as the world around me came to life. Raven's cries of pain continued, but they were now partnered with inhuman howls of violence. In their midst, I heard another creature, but they soon all blended together in my clouded mind. My legs were abruptly free from the crushing weight of James Wolfe. It took me a moment to realize this, and when I did, it took another few for my mind to focus. Another dark-colored wolf was hovering over me, watching me with a careful expression. It was not holding me down, though, rather protecting me from what lay beyond. The wolf shifted his weight, glancing at the rest of the forest, then back to me with worried eyes. They were dark brown, matching the color of its fur, and the appearance of my brother. Just as I realized this, he whipped his head forward, muscles tensing. I eased up onto my elbows and lifted my head to gaze around was large wolf. Every movement took every ounce of strength I had left, but I kept on moving. After a long time, I was kneeling, clutching Will's back leg for support. When I raised my gaze, I saw that Bray was watching my every move with narrowed eyes. His hands were bloody and outstretched. Behind him was carnage. Tree limbs were shattered, littering the forest floor. Every inch of ground held claw marks. Raven's body was limp on the floor. You know you can't overpower me, Bray growled. You can't even shift out of your uncontrollable wolf. My fingers twisted in Will's coarse fur, He snarled at Bray's remark, shifting his weight from side to side. I need you alive, Bray continued, but that does not mean I need you in one piece. His face began to morph and bloodied hands cracked into paws. In another moment, Bray was gone, and a black wolf was in his place. It blended in with the night, seemingly disappearing within the shadows of the trees. Will was the first to move. He lunged forward and began a gruesome battle with Bray. They tore at one another, fighting for dominance in their lives. When the wolves drew nearer to me, I gathered my senses and strength, and stood. I stumbled out of the way just as the two wolves crashed into the spot I lay moments before. Without waiting for them to collide with me again, I continued forward into the trees and away from the battle. They continued tearing at each other behind me as I drew nearer to the carnage of the forest where Will's once lifeless body laid, in almost the exact same spot. As I drew near to her, I noticed the blood pooling around her body. Her chest rose and fell rapidly as if each breath was a great struggle. My legs gave out as I fell by her side, and her wide eyes bore into me. Her lips moved with phantom words and whispers that I was never able to hear. As if sensing my lack of understanding, Raven raised the shaking hand. Her mouth continued to move as she pointed a finger into the forest. Her hand, though trembling beyond control, never wavered in its direction. My gaze followed where she gestured, but the only thing was trees. When I looked back into her eyes, she was staring at me with an urgent expression. I flicked my gaze back and forth between her and the forest, before finally making a decision to follow her command. Though I realized I didn't know Raven like I thought I had, I did know that she knew me. She knew I would never leave my brother, even if it meant I would die. She knew I would fight until that last moment. She knew I would always look for a way out, even if that way was stupid and reckless. So when she pointed into a seemingly tree-congested part of a forest, I knew she was indicating for me to run. I knew there was something more just beyond the tree line. I stumbled to my feet and ran. My hands clutched passing trees for support as my body threatened to give out under the weight of my injuries. Soon, my vision dark spots and I grew lightheaded. Still, there had to be something there. There had to be something Raven was pointing me to. This couldn't be the end. Chapter 60 to a disgrace. I broke through the tree line and fell into a meadow. The grass went up to my knees and the moon cast a harsh light upon it. A small patch of water pooled near the tree line with rocks glistening around the edges. Shadows stretched from the center of the clearing, leading to a small truck that sat parked on the grass. A triumphant smile graced my lips, and for several moments, I thought I was hallucinating. Only when I staggered to the door and threw myself inside did I believe that what I was experiencing was real. My hands ran along the steering wheel as I sunk into the carpeted seats. Blood soaked into the cloth and dripped onto the floor, and for a moment, the weight of my injuries threatened to overwhelm me. I stared at the blood as more and more of it escaped my body, entranced by how much was running down my legs. Then, I shook my head. That moment passed, and I was shifting the car into gear. Once the car had started, I let out a cry of victory. It was short-lived because as soon as the sound escaped, my thoughts caught up to me. I couldn't drive back to Will. There was no path. I couldn't leave him, because there was no guarantee he would survive long enough for me to get help. Here I was, on the verge of turning the tides and surviving, but at an utter loss as to what I could do to make it happen. My hands hovered over the steering wheel. My feet rested on the pedals. There was a small path leading out of the meadow that I knew would take me away from here, away from Bray, away from the danger, but also away from Will. I scanned the trees once again, hesitating for a small moment. That moment was cut short when a figure in the side of my vision emerged from the trees. It was a wolf, unlike any ever seen, lingering just behind the entrance of the meadow. Its fur was grey with white-tipped ears and eyes black as the sky. We stared at each other as another identical wolf emerged, stopping next to the first. The second tilted its head and narrowed its eyes, taking a small step toward me. My heart leapt into my throat as a scream threatened to erupt. As my panic grew, the scene around me shifted. Trees on the other side of the clearing snapped in half as 2 more wolves came crashing into the grass. They stumbled over one another, biting, clawing, and drawing as much blood as they could manage. When their frenzied attacks paused long enough for me to search their eyes, I recognized Bray standing tall with a wounded Will cringing before him. Will's wolf limped away as Bray stalked forward. His attack was slow and calculated, whereas Will was struggling for survival. When he tripped over his limbs and Bray drew back to lunge, I didn't hesitate. I ignored the foreign wolves and went straight to the threat. My feet floored the gas pedal and the car lurched toward Peyton Bray. The horn played as I tried to warn Will away. He looked back just in time to yelp and dive to the side, stumbling out of the car's reach. Bray had more time to react and was turning away before I came close to running into him. I didn't let that deter me. When I reached the edge of the meadow, I whipped around and barreled straight for the black wolf. Once more, mud and grass flew as the tires fought for traction. When the car was facing Bray again, he was standing stationary at the other end of the clearing, staring at me with determination. My face twisted into a scowl as I slammed down on the pedal and barrel forward. Bray matched the movements of the car, running at top speed. He kept his eyes trained on me as his feet flew across the grass. The distance between us grew rapidly smaller. The moment I braced myself to crush him, Bray let out a harrowing snarl. He leapt toward the truck and flew through the air, aiming his massive body straight for the windshield. I didn't have time to scream. My hands flew to protect my face as I watched the black wolf soar through the air. Time came to a standstill. My feet slammed on the brakes. I closed my eyes and tensed for shards of glass to cut through my skin and end my life. Bray would heal from the impact, but I would not. Another sound engulfed my ears, threatening to bring me back to the present. It was a different wolf, howling to the moon. The noise struck my heart in more than one way and forced me to open my eyes to find the source. I didn't have to wait long. With a flash of blonde, Bray's wolf was knocked from the sky. He fell to the ground, several feet away. As the other wolf barreled over him, red eyes flashed in the dark clearing, drawing my attention away for a moment too long. The car flew forward, racing for the trees. The tires worked for traction as my hands flew to the steering wheel. The world twisted around me as my body ricocheted off the seats. When the car finally came to a halt, my body continued swaying back and forth, my head spinning. My fingers fumbled for the door handle, and in a daze, I stumbled out of the car. I fell to the ground, grasping at the blades of grass. My vision swam, but when I looked up, I focused long enough to see the fight was only escalating. 2 wolves were circling each other, though Will was no longer in this battle. Bray paced on heavy feet as he stared at his new opponent, searching for weaknesses and planning an attack. The other wolf watched Bray with a calm yet sharp demeanor. His blonde fur rippled with anticipation. Samuel was back. Bray lunged, but Samuel didn't hesitate. He dodged the attack and sunk his teeth into the other wolf. Bray's composure faltered, leaving Samuel to gnash and tear at every piece of flesh he could find. By the time Bray was released, he was limping and beginning a retreat. A low howl cut through the night, gaining the attention of all in the clearing. Will was staggering toward me but had collapsed next to the water, which separated us. Bray took advantage of the distraction and dove toward Will, but Samuel anticipated his movements. He caught the black wolf by the back legs, pulling him back into the fight. Bray twisted around and leapt onto Samuel's back, ripping into the skin between his shoulders. The blonde wolf snarled, throwing Bray toward the trees and stalking toward him. Once more, I tore my focus away from the fight and crawled around the rocks until I was next to Will. His head was hanging halfway in the water and he was unable to pull himself away. He sunk into the mud and his eyes were clouding over. The breaths he was able to take were shallow and labored, and his tail flicked with anxiety. I lowered myself down next to him, pulling his head into my lap. Will turned to look at me, eyes shining with unspoken words. My hands smoothed over his face, flattening the fur matted with blood and grime. "Stay with me," I mumbled, my eyes scanning his body. There was a large gash running along his back, another along his belly. Blood covered nearly every inch of his fur. "You'll be okay," I told him, holding back a sob. Will whimpered, pushing his snout into my hand. Tears fell from my eyes as I laid my forehead between his ears. The battle of the other wolves was still raging, growing more violent by the second. Their snarls pulled my attention away from Will, who was already watching them with wary eyes. The blonde wolf fur was stained crimson, but the black wolf was beginning to weaken, just as Samuel's wolf prepared to lunge again. His attention cut to the edge of the clearing. One by one, figures began to emerge from the trees. Some I recognized. Others were strangers. They all seemed to recognize Samuel and Bray. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilban, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing Kishut's enthusiasm. Their gazes were fixed upon them, each horror-filled and confused. As they drew closer, Samuel stepped away from Bray and closer to them. The cracking of bones echoed through the meadow, and after a few moments, Samuel stood tall. He threw a bundle of cloth at Bray's retreating wolf, moving back around to face him. When Bray was a man again, the meadow was silent. I could hear his heavy breathing even from where I sat, feel his cold glare on each and every one in the vicinity who dared to disrupt his evening. He turned his gaze to Samuel, eyes ablaze with rage. "Have you called in your reinforcements to finish me off?" Samuel rolled his shoulders, glancing around. He kept his back toward me, and I found myself wishing I could be by his side. As if in answer, his head tilted toward me and I saw the side of his expression. His eyes were hard, his jaw set firm. He shook his head so slightly that I would have missed it had I not been staring. Then, he squared his frame and regarded Bray. When he spoke, his words were harsh and met the temperature of Peyton's glare. "This is the last of the pack who is celebrating their fallen one's lives. We all had a fight and came to investigate." He spat his next words. "Seems we arrived just in time for you to kill my mate. How convenient," Peyton panted, sneering his words. "But you have it wrong. It was your human who was killing me." Samuel took a step forward. "I think you're mistaken." "Am I?" Peyton straightened his spine. "Go and see the two others she already killed." There was a beat. Then Samuel responded through his teeth. "What are you doing here?" "I was coming back from patrol when I found your mate at the border." "We are far from the border." "Bray. Perhaps that is because she car and killed the wolves when I attempted to speak with her." The silence that surrounded us was thick, stretching further than even the moon could reach. There was no mistaking the horror-filled expressions flinching my way, accusing me of the things Bray spoke. My heartbeat was the loudest thing of the night, pounding hard enough to deafen anyone within the meadow. Bray smiled. "I found her driving a car through the border. She was in perfect health. No bite. No adverse reaction to your werewolf gene taking over her pathetic human life." He turned toward those gathering around Samuel and raised his voice. "When I found her, she was running away, gathering the rest of the humans to kill our pack." Samuel lied. He never bit her. He let her run off, only for her to come back to kill us all. And now that I've discovered his plan, Samuel is here to kill me. "That's not true," Samuel shouted. "Where's your evidence?" Peyton sneered. "She killed them now," gathering the attention of everyone in the clearing. The words had left my mouth in such a rush, I hadn't considered their implications. Now I had a band of angry wolves glaring down at me. I regarded them all for a moment, before letting my gaze shift to Samuel. He was staring at me with a tense expression, his frame clouded with stress. I took a deep breath. "We were act by you and James." My gaze shifted to Bray, who held a distant expression. "Why would I set out to kill a wolf, when I know that I would only die?" "Because you are human," Peyton answered. "They have done it before. Look at what happened with our alpha. You were running away to gather others to finish the job." A tumultuous snarl left Samuel, and the attention was back on him. "Do not lie. It was their guns that killed him." Bray roared. "The humans' attack killed countless members of the pack. Samuel matched his volume. "No. It was you." A momentary silence fell upon the clearing. It was heavy with Samuel's words and the memory of those who lost their lives that night. Everyone exchanged nervous glances, the crowd shuffling their feet back toward the trees. Samuel, breathing heavily, continued in a voice as calm as death. "Had you followed Bray from the moment Triley died? I knew it was you. And your men." Bray's eyes narrowed. "What evidence do you have?" "You had them killed." The attention of the clearing was turned again to the edge of the forest. Footsteps could be heard, and soon enough, more people began to gather. Leading them was Goldie, with Marshall at her side. Samuel glanced at them, then turned a scowl back on Bray. "I didn't know if we were being attacked again." Samuel spoke in an even tone, staring at Bray as others flooded the scene. "I called in reinforcements." Peyton started at the individuals emerging from the forest. Goldie broke away from them to stand between the crowd and Samuel. Marshall scanned the meadow until he fell upon me and Will, collapsed on the ground. He wasted no time in sprinting across the grass, closing the distance between us in seconds. He came to a halt, kneeling next to us. With careful hands, he began to assess my legs, but I pushed him away. "Will," I told him. "Look at Will." Marshall didn't argue. He didn't even glance my way before shifting his attention to my brother. His hands moved along his body, pressing in various places. Will's breathing was shallow and harsh, but he laid still. "You're lying. Even now." "Samuel," Bray snarled, glaring at us. "Tell them who that wolf is. Tell all of your people what he did, what she did. Tell everyone you call here what really happened, and what you've been hiding." All along, the meadow was silent, waiting with bated breath. An unreadable mask had fallen upon Samuel's face, though I saw the endless tension lining his shoulders. He scanned the meadow, looking into the faces of every person gathered there, as he spoke in a firm voice. "The wolf is Samantha's brother. He was turned unwillingly by one who was exiled. Tell them what happened the night the Alpha died." Bray goaded. Samuel glared at him, his voice unwavering. "Riley and I helped him through the shift. When it was almost over, Riley was distracted and got injured." Peyton began to speak, but Samuel raised his voice and spoke over his words. "You would have been fine, had it not been for the gunfire headed by Bray. We were ambushed by what we initially thought to be a human attack. Upon a closer look, there was no way it was possible. All the guns were being held by Bray, the one in charge of security. I know your games, Samuel." Peyton smiled and shifted his feet. "You are only distracting them from the actual proof. Why would I kill our Alpha? I would not take his place. I would not want my pack in ruin. You, however, have only done that. You have lied from the beginning. You are not fit to run this pack, and you never will be." The world stood still, and somehow, I knew what Bray was going to say. "Next." Samuel suspected his words as well because his hands balled into fists and he tensed for the reaction we all knew was coming. "Bray," Samuel tried. Peyton spoke over him, turning to the members of the pack. "He was a human. It is why his mate is human. It is why he is weak, and is why he can never be an Alpha." The words sent daggers into the cold air. My heart left my body. Samuel's one secret was now out in the open, all because he had trusted me. I had taken that trust and used Samuel's secret as a way to selfishly convince Raven to escape with me. She hadn't hesitated in using that knowledge against us and betraying me. A stray female broke away from the crowd. She had dark maroon hair and wore a hopeful expression. Her gaze danced between Peyton and Samuel, faltering when she locked eyes with Samuel. "That's not true. It's not true. This is Beta." Samuel wouldn't look up from the ground. Another few people stepped forward, asking Samuel the same question. When he refused to answer, Peyton smiled. "He can never run this pack. It's not in his blood. He's a disgrace." Goldie stepped forward then, stopping only inches away from Bray. She leveled herself up to his chest, glaring daggers into his face. His composure never wavered. After a moment, she turned to those gathered but didn't step away from Bray. Her voice held the conviction of 1,000 testaments. Alpha Riley knew. She let her words sink in before continuing. He knew the entire time. He welcomed Samuel into our pack and wouldn't have anyone else be at his side. He didn't care. Bray suddenly moved forward, knocking Goldie off balance. She gained it back without hesitation, but Peyton was already on the move. He stalked towards Samuel, his expression growing deadlier with each step. It was supposed to be me. Before you showed up, it was my place. He was standing in front of Samuel now, breathing heavily. Now, in taking it back, Samuel narrowed his eyes. Are you challenging me? Bray, there's nothing to challenge. Chapter 63. To the death. The fight erupted without a moment's notice. Samuel and Bray were at each other's throats faster than they could even shift. They met mid-air in a tangle of arms and shifting limbs. As their wolves took control, blood spread and the crowd thinned. Some women screamed. Some men ran for the comfort of the forest. Others stayed in the clearing but backed away just enough so they could watch the challenge unfold. At the head of those who stayed was Goldie. She spread her arms and pushed back those who remained behind, keeping them away from the snarling and out-of-control wolves. Her face was set in a firm grimace, as though she expected disaster. My heart reached and battled with Samuel. Bray had a ferocity that was hard to be matched. With every wound Samuel inflicted, Bray would cause another. With every howl of pain Bray would cry. Achidi make sure Samuel felt it. Tenfold. But Samuel was not a quitter, and he was going to be beaten. The wolves circled each other, lunging and withdrawing. Bray had Samuel backed up against the forest. Both of their fur was standing on edge, rippling with anticipation. Blood stained Samuel's coat to the point that the blonde was nearly invisible. He was limping heavily on one leg and a chunk of his ear was missing. Bray was none the worse. He tried to hide it, but his back leg was nearly gone. The battle raged and raged. Minutes passed by quicker than seconds. With each one, the wolves became more wounded, but this didn't slow them down. They tumbled over one another, tore with teeth, pounced with vigor. This was the end of the line for them both, and neither was content to let the fight end quickly. Bray lunged. As soon as he did, he realized his mistake. Samuel whirled, dodging as he dove to the side and leapt off a tree, then rounded to pounce on Peyton's back. He tore into his neck and Bray's black wolf crumbled. The struggle continued for a few minutes more as Peyton tried everything to get Samuel off his back. But Samuel was relentless. His wolf was beyond anything he'd ever seen. At moment, I think Samuel could have taken over the world. When Peyton ceased his struggles, Samuel shifted back to his skin. He still held Bray pinned to the ground, and soon enough, he shifted back as well. The clearing was in absolute silence, and the only thing to break it was the sound of the men's heavy breathing. Submit, Samuel commanded, digging his elbow into Bray's neck. You'll never be fit, Peyton panted. He gasped for air as Samuel dug deeper into his airway. You're not even a real wolf, Samuel roared. He drew back a fist and sent it flying at Peyton. Blood splattered and blended with grass and skin. They won't accept you, Bray shouted. I've already told the chiefs. You'll never be Alpha. Nobody wants you. It's over, Bray. You've lost, Samuel shouted. Their faces were inches apart. Submit. There was a pause stiller than silence. Then, Bray laughed. To the death, Samuel. Without warning, he shifted back to his wolf and lunged. His teeth went for Samuel's torso, but before they could end his life, Samuel turned and grabbed the wolf's neck. He jumped on Bray's back and fell. The echo of a sickening crack went on for what felt like hours. Samuel laid motionless on Bray's wolf's back. Bray was no longer breathing. Samuel looked lifeless as well. No one else dared to move. The first to break this trance was Goldie. She rushed forward and knelt by Samuel and began running her hands along his back. They came back coated in blood. My eyes narrowed and I realized that though the fight was over, Samuel was far from all right. Blood was continuously pouring from countless wounds across his body. Goldie wasted no time in grabbing pieces of shredded clothing and covering the gashes. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nobel, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm, she cried, searching the clearing. My gaze whipped down to him. His hands were flying across Will's body, but he kept glancing at Samuel. With the little amount of strength I had left, I pushed him off of Will. Samuel needs you. My voice broke. I couldn't tear my gaze from Samuel. I tried moving toward him, but my legs refused to work. They didn't respond to my commands. I knew I was pinned beneath Will, and for the time being, I blamed my inability to move on that. With another desperate lurching of my heart, I pushed at Marshall as tears spilled from my eyes. Go to Samuel. Please. Will be all right. Samuel. Marshall looked at me for half a second before he sprang up and sprinted across the clearing. He and Goldie acted together, barking orders at those who remained to watch the fight. Black spots danced in my vision as I watched them work. I tried to keep my attention on Will. I could see the unsteady rise and fall of his chest, which meant he was alive. He was unconscious and his head was still in my lap, preventing me from moving. Not that I wanted to. Now that I had nothing to distract me, my own pain was growing. With every passing moment, another part of my body exploded in agony. My mind was screaming at me to stay awake, to focus on Will and Samuel, but my body wouldn't cooperate. A small part of my mind begged for sleep and reminded me that Will and Samuel were in good hands. Marshall had tended to Will and now he and Goldie were going to fix Samuel. They didn't need me. They would be okay. But then, I would catch sight of the bloody rags being piled onto Samuel's body. Without my permission, my heart would stutter and send a wave of anxiety through my veins. My mind and body were at war and I was sure who was winning. My vision was letting in more darkness than light. My eyes were fluttering. I thought I heard someone calling my name. My mind responded, but my mouth didn't. When my world finally went dark, I was still fighting against the reprieve of rest. My consciousness shifted to nightmares of dead bodies and bloody figures. Though my body slept, it was far from resting. I knew I woke up several times, but each time I did was more confusing than the last. Sometimes there was light. Sometimes there were voices. After a while, I didn't know what was real and what wasn't. I didn't care. Then, I heard his voice. It started off as a distant hum in the back corners of my mind and grew as a torrential wave threatening to break the shore. I held onto it like a drunken sailor searching for land. And eventually, I found the light. When I awoke, it was too more darkness. But this kind was different than before. There was a soft glow from beside me and an ache in my chest. There was an ache all over my body. I groaned and tried to sit up, my eyes adjusting to my new world. I was in a bed with wires all over my body. They strangled my hands as I pulled at them, dazed and confused. A monitor beeped behind me. Something stirred beside my bed. I turned and found the all too familiar sight of Samuel, sitting in a hospital chair pulled to comfort. He was leaning on my bed, cradling my hand in his own. His head was bowed and resting on folded arms. His shoulders rose and fell in a steady and comforting rhythm. That rhythm broke as I involuntarily groaned, pain shooting up my legs and into my chest. I sucked in a deep breath and tried to remain quiet. But Samuel was already waking up. He lifted his head as if it held the weight of the world. His eyes blinked several times as he searched the room. Finally, his gaze landed on me. He went still. His gaze darted across my eyes, down my body, to the machines behind me, and finally back to my eyes. His mouth was left hanging open as he struggled to speak. I laughed once, and the spell of stillness was broken. Samuel jumped from his chair and grabbed my hands, holding them tight within his own. He dipped his head into my shoulder and stayed there, shoulders shaking. Samantha, his whispered words sent chills across my skin. You're really awake. I nodded my head and held Samuel on my shoulder. The world was flooding back to me. The last time I saw him, he was covered in blood and barely alive. To see him beside me was more than a miracle. I brought both my hands to cradle his head. Pulling it away from my shoulder, I stared at him, evaluating his face as much as I could in the dimmed light. He seemed tired, worn down, and there were scabs littering his skin. But he was alive, and he was here. I shook my head, a smile creeping onto my face. Samuel, he laughed once. At your service. My voice cracked, barely a whisper. How are you okay? It's nice to know you have so much faith in me. We both laughed and I dropped his face. He sat back down in his chair, pulling it closer to my bed and not letting go of my hands. He turned to the side and brought me a glass of water, which I gulped down. When he turned back, I caught sight of the side of his face. The light illuminated it just right so that I could see the chunk of skin missing from the side of his head where his ear used to be. My eyes widened. Samuel, your ear. I know. I grabbed his head and turned it to the side so I could examine the 2 folds of skin where his ear used to be. I ran my fingers over the surrounding skin, but he groaned and took my hands gently away, shaking his head. Still a bit sore. Samantha. I dropped my hands, horrified. I'm so. I'm okay. He cut me off. Then, his gaze flickered to my neck and down my body. Are you? How are you feeling? I'm fine. I automatically answered. I was in a hell of a lot of pain. My body felt hot, uncomfortable, and heavy. But I didn't want pain medicine to put me to sleep. Again. How long was I out? Only a day or so. How are you okay? Samuel cocked his head and smirked. I'm a fast here. Remember? Right. I laughed once. The motion sent a wave of pain through me. I tried not to wince, but Cal didn't keep it from leaking onto my face. Samuel's brow furrowed. Before he could say anything about it, I broke in. What did I miss? How is Will? What happened? He gave me a look, then dropped his gaze and sighed. Will is recovering all right. Marshall was able to help him a lot in the clearing so there won't be any lasting damage. A weight was lifted off my chest. Thank goodness. Samuel kept his gaze down. There's something else you should know. What is it? Is it with the pack? What happened after Bray? He rubbed his neck and gazed at me for a moment. That's been put on hold until you woke up. The chiefs are here. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. They saw everything. What? How they came early. Heard everything in the clearing and watched it happen. Wait. I brought my fingers to my temples, massaging a headache. I think I remember seeing wolves. Before you got there, Samuel didn't look surprised. They saw almost everything. Well, then what's the problem? Why do they need me? They need statements and things. Well, do you know what's going to happen? He sighed and took a long pause. No, not after Bray announced I was human. Just like that. The weight fell back on my heart. I struggled to speak for a moment. Samuel. You don't have to say it. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. I'm so sorry. He trusted me and I told Raven and she told Bray and it's just made everything more complicated for you and I'm so sorry and I never meant for any of this to happen and now. Samuel silenced me with a hand on my lips. He was smiling, but it didn't reach his eyes. Samantha, you didn't know this would happen. I lowered his hand and held it in my own. But I should have. Tears pricked at my eyes. He tilted his head and wiped the side of my eye with his other hand. Don't tell yourself that. You can't change what happened. You trusted Raven. We all did. I'm not upset and neither should you be. I took a shaky breath. But I am. It makes sense though. You know, how we left your apartment so easily that night. How she never got hurt. I shook my head, stealing a glance at Samuel. I should have seen it coming. I trusted her. Till he squeezed my hand. Images from the other night flew through my mind. Is she all right? Samuel let out a short breath. I don't know. No one can find her. She's gone. Samuel nodded. It's probably for the best. I took a breath and traced one of Samuel's knuckles. I thought maybe we'll killed her. We would have found her body. Somehow. That didn't make me feel any better. We sat in silence for a few moments. The beeping of monitors keeping time. Eventually, I sighed and tried lifting myself up. When pain shot down my legs, I winced and cast a sheepish look at Samuel. His eyebrows was crunched together and his mouth was set in a thin line. You shouldn't be moving. I know. I guess. Can you just help me to the bathroom? For some reason, Samuel's eyes went wide. His mouth was left hanging open as his gaze darted from me to the bathroom door. After a moment, I laughed, if only to ease the awkward silence. It's all right if you don't want to. I can just ask a nurse. No. He refused to look at me. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Noble. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. I drew out the word. What do you expect me to do? To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Noble. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Samuel rubbed the back of his neck, shooting me hesitant glances every few seconds. He opened and closed his mouth several times. His knee bounced and even I was beginning to feel his apprehension. Samuel, there's something you should know. When he was silent again. Well, are you going to tell me? He looked down my body, his gaze slowly traveling back up to my face. Marshall and other doctors worked really hard on you. James and Bray did a lot of damage. It was James. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Noble. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Breathlessly. Achius dead. Right. Samuel nodded once. He took another breath, then gathered my hands in both of his. Samantha, there was a lot of damage. What do you say? What happened? He looked as if he wanted to look away, but he held my gaze. His eyes shone and his grip was firm. After a moment, he took a large breath and finally told me, they had to amputate your leg. There was a beat. What? The injuries were too much for your body to heal. It was all already infected. I let out a nervous laugh. No, you're wrong. I can still feel pain down there. Samuel glanced down, closing his eyes. Samantha. Tears welled up in my eyes. I ripped my hands from him, sitting up and tearing at the sheets that covered my body. Samuel stood and tried to calm me, but the damage was done. The sheets were gone from my bed and I was staring at the empty space where my leg used to be. Chapter 60 for not finding nothing made sense. My world was suspended for what felt like an eternity. I could still feel the pain, but when I looked down, nothing was there. I was missing a piece of me, a piece that still had. Tears poured from my eyes. My body shook with sobs. I was numb to anything else but the sight of the stump that used to be my leg. It broke off just below the knee and was wrapped in layers upon layers of gauze. It didn't look like my body. It made more sense that it belonged to someone else and this was just another nightmare. But I knew it was. In the nightmares, I was always alone. Now I had someone beside me, holding me up when I couldn't do it for myself. Samuel clung to me, and I to him. We were two broken beams trying to keep the other from falling apart. Eventually, I fell asleep. Samuel crawled into the bed next to me, even though he was half hanging off the small mattress. He gathered me in his arms and dried my tears, soothing my sobs and pushing away the nightmare that was now a reality. When I awoke, he hadn't moved. I rubbed my eyes and buried my face into his arm for countless minutes. Sunlight was streaming through the window though, lighting up the room and introducing a new day. The rays peeking through the window hit Samuel directly in the eye. The longer this went on, the more he stirred and his breathing became uneven. After a while, he took a deep breath and paused, and I knew he was awake. But he didn't say anything. I didn't speak to him. To my agent extraordinaire, webnovel, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. We only listened to the humming outside the hospital room door and a light footfall of countless feet passing by. The silence was almost peaceful. There was much that could be said. There wasn't anything I wanted to discuss, and I had a feeling Samuel felt the same way. But, despite her preference for a respite in a silent room, the world outside continued to spin. The sunlight left Samuel's face, and when it did, he cleared his throat and spoke. I should get the doctor. They'll want to know you're awake. I nodded. Samuel hesitated, then kissed the top of my head before departing. When I had the room to myself, I flipped onto my back and stared at the ceiling. My heart was at war with all my emotions, but I was too tired to fight. All I knew was that Samuel was there to hold me as I fell apart. That was good enough. I didn't care about mates. I didn't care about wolves. And I didn't care about what was waiting for me beyond these hospital doors. Samuel was here, and that was enough until I was ready to face the world. Maybe then, I wouldn't have to do it alone. Samuel returned a few moments later. At his side were Marshall and Drive. Gates. Marshall smiled while Drive. Gates looked over her clipboard. We're glad to see you awake, Samantha, Marshall said. Nice to see that Sammy boy hasn't finished you off yet. Samuel shot Marshall a glare as an uncomfortable laugh escaped me. Drive. Gates ignored them both and came to my side, inspecting the machines beside my bed. How is your pain? It's not fine. Samuel stepped forward. Drive. Gates nodded and continued her work with the machines. Marshall came up behind her, stopping at the foot of my bed. He placed his hands on the bed frame and looked at me with crinkling eyes. We're getting along great. She is awake and recovering. You can see him when we're finished with you. I nodded and smiled. Samuel came up to stand beside me, and Marshall gazed at us with a look of adoration. He looked as if he wanted to say something, but he shook his head and watched Drive. Gates. After a moment, she withdrew from the machines. Everything is looking well, Samantha. When you're ready, we can discuss further treatment for your leg, or lack thereof. Marshall quit. To my agent extraordinaire, webnovel, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Samuel shot him a look of absolute fury. Something pricked my heart, and for a moment I was tempted to do something other than frown. Marshall watched me as my face fought different expressions before he mumbled under his breath and looked at Samuel with a glint in his eyes. Drive. Gates ignored us all and walked around my bed. She hung the clipboard at the base and said, Well, leave you to your morning. I'm glad you're doing better, Samantha. She began to walk out of the room and Marshall followed suit. He shot me a glance as they left, winking as Samuel lowered himself in the seat next to me. I'm sorry about him, Samuel said as soon as the door was shut. Don't worry about it. I know you want to see Will, but the chiefs want to talk to you before you see anyone else. I nodded. I should have figured as much. You don't have to see them right away. Instead of responding, I looked at Samuel. He was staring at my sheets. Underneath his eyes were dark circles and his hair was beyond repair. The side of his head, where there used to be an ear, was now covered with red and inflamed skin. He wore a long-sleeve shirt, and I was beginning to think it was supposed to cover the rest of his injuries. How long has it been since a doctor looked at you? Samuel looked up, confused. I don't know. I'm good. No, you're not. Get Marshall back in here. Anyone but him. I set my mouth in a firm line. Samuel squinted his eyes and looked at me, twisting his lips into a frown. If I do this, then you have to tell me when you're feeling okay. No exceptions. You feel pain, you tell me or a doctor and we'll take care of it. Then you have to tell me the same thing and let Marshall look at you. Samuel groaned. How about we just agree to tell each other these things? And forget Marshall? Absolutely not. Samuel grumbled something and pulled out his phone. He typed away, hopefully texting Marshall. then put it on the desk beside us. Silence stretched for a moment, but I could tell Samuel was uncomfortable. "What is it?" He looked up. "I'm just thinking about you." My voice quieted. "About Laydick. And other things. What are you thinking?" "Same. And you?" A ghost of a smile appeared on his lips. "If you'd have known this was all it took to get you to think about me, I would have done it ages ago." I grimaced, but Samuel laughed. "That joke. Horrible." He laughed again, then grew sober. "How are you doing today?" "To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Noble. Heartfelt thanks for your unfading patience, enthusiasm." I took a deep breath and tried to keep my voice from shaking. My initial reaction was to slough off his concern, but at that point, I knew Samuel would never believe me. And realized I didn't want to pretend anymore. "I'm not fine." Samuel reached for my hands and buried his face within our fingers. "That's okay, you." He let out a heavy breath. "I'm not fine. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Noble. Heartfelt thanks for your unfading patience, enthusiasm." We sat in silence for what felt like hours. I wish I could say I had earth-shattering epiphanies in that time, but my brain was numbed. Everything I ever knew was gone or changed, including pieces of myself. The very person I wanted to stay away from was now the one person I needed and wanted. I was too broken to care about what I once dreamed of. Those dreams were gone and there was no getting them back. I didn't know what the future held. And for once, I didn't want to dream about it. The present was enough. It's kind of fitting. I suddenly broke the long silence. In a sick and twisted way, Samuel sat up and looked at me. "Care to elaborate?" "We're both missing pieces of ourselves and that only happened because we're supposed to complete each other." He glanced down. "That's kind of a morbid way of putting it." Samuel paused, then looked back up. "Do you think we complete each other?" My brow furrowed and I continued staring at the ceiling. "I don't really know what to think. I know that since I met you both our lives have gone to hell. I know. None of this would have happened if I didn't find you." I shook my head once, then turned to look at Samuel. "I don't know if that's true. I don't know what would have happened. What did happen is horrible and there's a lot that I wish I could change. But I can't change anything and neither can you. So now, we're both left in the aftermath of it all with nothing but each other." Samuel refused to look at me. He was staring holes in my sheets and his shoulders were stiff. I grabbed his hand that was resting next to me and squeezed, willing him to look up. When he didn't, I grabbed his chin and directed his gaze back to me. "We're both left in a horrible mess of things with nothing but to keep us sane. But I don't think that's such a bad thing." He was quiet for a moment, searching my eyes. Then, he told me in a soft voice, "I don't think so. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Noble. Heartfelt thanks for your unfading patience, enthusiasm." What might have been a smile framed my next words. "You're not such horrible company. You know." I glanced to the mangled flesh where his ear once was and felt a pang shoot through my heart. I tried to keep my voice light, but I was sure I actually managed it. "You might need me now anyway. I doubt you'll be able to hear. And I might need you. I won't be able to walk. And I don't think a three-legged wolf is set up for success." Samuel stiffened and bowed his head, gripping his neck. "It shouldn't have happened. You were bitten, and it was your choice. I know. It was more than just your leg. It shouldn't have happened. I know." I ran my hand along my neck and shoulder, before stopping short. There was only minimal bandaging, if you could even call it that. The place I knew James had bitten me was a minor inconvenience compared to how the rest of my body felt. This only added to my fears. When Samuel remained silent, I shook my head and looked to the ceiling. By now, I practically had all the ceiling tiles memorized, each bump, each crevice, each discoloration. They were the only things keeping me sane in moments like this. Finally, I closed my eyes and whispered the thing I'd known since I'd woken up. "I'm going to change." Samuel closed both of his hands over my own. "Probably. That's why everything is healing faster, yes. I worried my lip, trying to keep the tremble out of my voice. Will I die? Probably not. How much time? We're not going to think about that right now. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Noble, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Samuel reached to brush away my hair but kept his hand on my cheek. His voice grew deeper as he smoothed his thumb against my skin. This never should have happened. I never wanted you to change. Not if you didn't want to. I know I said some things at the beginning of all this, but I was acting out of anger and I didn't know what else to do. I know that's not an excuse. I know this is insanely messed up. Samuel broke off and fussed out alongside. His jaw was stiff and he refused to look anywhere but at the wall. After a moment, he closed his eyes and said, "Now the choice was taken away from you completely." I nodded and watched as Samuel crumpled before me. His head was lowered so I couldn't see his face. But that enough spoke volumes. Samuel was always able to put on a mask when he needed to. At least, he was able to until now. He took in a ragged breath. I just wish I was there to stop it. I reached for Samuel's cheek, but he kept his gaze hidden. After a moment I sighed and looked around, trying to form what I wanted to say. I wish. Rubbing my palm. I wish you were there. I realize that now. I never wanted to leave. Not at the end. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Noble, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. I've spent so much time running and all it's done is hurt everyone. I'm not going to say that everything is okay because it's not. But for the moment, we're both alive and getting better. Let's just face everything else when it comes. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Noble, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. When Samuel didn't respond, I grabbed his hand and tried to pull him back to the present. Thank you, I told him. For saving me, for fighting Bray, for helping everyone. Samuel slowly looked up at me. Samantha, remember that. I gave him a small smile. I'm going to need you. Now there's no use in fighting it anymore. He mimicked my expression and kissed my hand. As long as you're there with me. Chapter 65 Chiefs. It was almost evening. Samuel and I spent the day together, mostly in silence. Unfortunately, the chiefs were growing impatient. They came to the hospital and there was no more avoiding anything. Samuel stood next to me, holding my hand. As they entered, the door shut behind them with an ominous thud, and the air in the room thickened. The two of them, a man and a woman, stood rod straight, staring at Samuel and me. The woman was taller than the man by several inches. Her skin was as pale as the hospital light and her eyes were tired. She had long black hair pulled into a high ponytail that swished as she walked further into the room. The man stood short but was built like an athlete. He had tan skin and dark hair that was growing thin. His eyes were cold and sunken, but when he spoke, his words were warm. "Delighted to meet you, Samantha," he said with a drawn-out accent. "My name is N and this is K." N turned to Samuel. "Good to see you on your feet." "Beta." Samuel nodded his head to both of them. "Chief Spears." The woman, K, spoke next. "We need to ask you several questions before we can proceed." I took a breath. "I understand." She turned to Samuel. "I hope you understand our need to speak without you here." Samuel stiffened. Then, to my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Noble, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. He bowed his head to each of them again, then turned to me. "They'll be right outside." He gave my hand a squeeze and left the room. As soon as he was gone, I felt my chest tighten. Kyan gazed at me with looks I couldn't quite decipher. I tried not to picture them as the all-powerful werewolves they actually were. I tried to ignore the fact they could kill me in less than a second. I tried not to think about what would happen if I told them something they didn't want to hear. N was the first to break the silence. "Beta Samuel has told us a lot about you. It is not often a human has a mate, Kay interjected. My fingers twisted together and I took a deep breath. Yes, that is true. Do you believe yourself to be his mate? Kay tilted her head and the light inside the room seemed to draw the rest of the color from her face. I furrowed my brow as my stomach twisted. Humans can't have mates. We realize this. End spoke, taking one small step forward. But, what do you believe? I paused for a moment. I don't know. I trust Samuel. Kay nodded and End smiled. A diplomatic answer. Rubbing a rough hand along his arms. It's the truth. I told them. Kay looked around the room. Have you always trusted him? Well, no, I said. Trust is earned. End laughed. Abruptly, rocking back on his heels. Perfect answers. Kay narrowed her eyes and looked down at the man. She spoke to me, but her gaze remained on N. Tell us of what happened. I took a deep breath. Starting when? When you first met the beta. Broken N. I struggled at first. So much had happened in so little time. And I hadn't wanted to leave anything out. I didn't want them thinking I was hiding anything. Or that Samuel had some long and secret plot I was involved in. He deserved to be alpha. It didn't matter if he was once human. He was better than any wolf I'd met. Before, Kai and N held on to every word I said. They each interjected into my story with certain questions and clarifications. But for the most part, they listened. The longer I spoke, the more Kay narrowed her eyes. N forgot his previous smile and looked at me with a lifeless expression. I could tell nothing about what either of them was thinking or if I was digging Samuel in me a deeper hole. When I finished my life story since meeting Samuel, N moved to the window and stared outside. Kay remained in her spot in the middle of the room. Despite their distance, they bounced questions off each other and directed them at me faster than I could think. What happened to the girl you left with? N asked. I don't know. I thought she was killed. Like I said. Kay didn't hesitate with her question. How did you survive? I don't know. After the fight, I blacked out. When I woke up I was in the hospital with Samuel. It seems awful lucky that you got away, N said, almost to himself. Kay nodded and glanced at him. Humans don't survive that. I glanced back and forth between them, exasperated with their constant questions, tired of being awakened in their presence, and wishing for nothing but Samuel to be by my side. Again, anger and annoyance pricked my heart and I responded before I could stop myself. I lost a leg and I was bitten by a werewolf. I wouldn't call that lucky. The duo was silent as I bit my tongue and cursed my outburst. Apparently, it still learned nothing in that department. Just at the moment when I thought that N and K were going to erupt, N laughed and Kay rolled her eyes. N turned from the window and walked over to the foot of my bed. That was long overdue. You do well under stress. I think we have adequate information, Kai announced. N nodded to me, then made his way to Kay. The two headed for the door without glancing back. Sudden anxiety clenched my heart and just as they were about to open the door. What's going to happen? N turned and smiled. And it seemed genuine. We need to discuss things. We will alert Samuel when we have reached a decision. Thank you for your time. Kay nodded toward me, then grabbed N by the arm. Before I could say another word, they both turned and left. They were gone faster than they arrived and I was left more worried than before. Not a moment later though, Samuel was rushing back into the room. He smiled when he saw me, then shut the door and sat at the foot of my bed. I raised my hands helplessly. I told them the truth about everything that happened. I don't know, Samuel. They asked a lot of questions and I couldn't tell what they were thinking and, hush. You did great. I heard the whole thing. I don't know. I shook my head and groaned. Samuel rubbed his hand up and down my leg and looked around the room. The worst they can do is send me away and appoint someone else. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeline Nilbay, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. The worst they could do is kill all of us. He laughed once. Somehow. I don't think that is going to happen. But what if they do send you away? Then I, Samuel, stood and walked to the head of my bed before cupping my cheeks and glancing between both of my eyes. Will be so heartbroken that I will definitely need an extraordinary amount of kissing and ego boost to ever be okay again. He was fighting back a smile. My expression fell and I stared at him without a hint of amusement. Underneath it all, though, I might have cracked a grin. "I'm serious, Samuel," I did, panting. Samuel laughed and retreated back to his chair beside me. "So am I. But, on top of that, I might also consider leaving and taking a few people with me, if they do want to come. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Noble, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. I do still have a family I would like to one day see again." His voice softened at the end of his sentence and all tones of amusement were washed away. "If you want company, I know a few people who might come along." Samuel smiled wider than I'd seen him smile in a long time. I reached for his hands, and the expression only grew. "Whatever happens," I began, "we'll be all right. We've made it this far. Who knows? You could still be Alpha. Maybe this world isn't so bad. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Noble, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm." Samuel groaned. It was barely there, but I heard the noise and everything that went along with it. I gave Samuel a questioning look, but he shrugged and glanced away. "Let's just see what they have to say. Whatever happens, we'll figure it out." Epilogue. The beach wasn't as peaceful to walk down anymore. But Samuel and I did it, hand in hand. I used him as a crutch and he lifted me over rocks and rushing water. Our pace was slow and we had no specific destination in mind, only the fresh air and sounds of folding waves. Samuel's phone rang. He dropped my hand to hold it up to his good ear, and we both stopped walking. After a moment he paused the call, took my hand, and carried me away from the water to sit on a set of rocks overlooking the sea. As soon as we sat down, I undid my prosthetic and rubbed the tender skin. I was aching almost everywhere. The doctors told me exercise was good, but with the amount of physical therapy they were putting me through, I was ready to topple over at any given minute. Samuel sat next to me and spoke into the phone in a low voice. "Goldie, what's wrong?" Her voice hummed on the other end of the line in a rapid succession of words. Samuel pinched the bridge of his nose and shook his head. "No, I really don't care that Marshall won't stop calling you Alpha." I laughed silently as Samuel sighed, with no other option than to listen to Goldie's rants. "Yes, your father. He can do whatever he likes." "No, that's not my job." Samuel took my hand as he waited for Goldie to finish speaking. She tended to be quite long-winded. Lately, in all honesty, she still hated the Alpha position. But the chiefs had given it to her. It was either that or let the pack be run by someone on the outside. They told us they believed and trusted Samuel, but in the fragile state the pack was in, they wanted a full-blooded wolf to take the Alpha position. I was furious. It went against everything I knew to be right and everything Samuel had ever told me. Samuel was more capable than anyone to watch over his pack. He deserved it. But what surprised me most out of anything was that Samuel wasn't upset about it. He never wanted any of it. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Noble, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Not in the way it was being given to him. I fully understood this when we were sitting in his apartment as he packed his things and tried to replace his door. Goldie wanted him back in the pack house, and with Will taking on other positions in the pack and my shift coming soon, we decided it wasn't a bad idea. Samuel was kneeling next to the door, picking up pieces of splintered wood. It just delivered a long-winded rant about the tyranny of wolves and the problems of hierarchy. He listened to everything I told him, then wiped his hands and turned to face me. "The world isn't fair, Samantha. The sooner we accept that, the sooner we can influence it." I had thought a lot about his words, especially as of late. I was too keen on the idea of becoming a wolf. It would happen during the next full moon and I felt ill-prepared. Not only because I could potentially die, but also because I still hated certain things about the wolf. Those would take time and effort to work through. It helped that I talked with Samuel more. But these weren't things that were going to change simply because I was forced to become the thing I hated. But, in the end, I realized it was specifically the wolves. There was corruption and selfishness and manipulation everywhere. If I looked enough, every aspect of life would be filled with it. So, I tried to do as Samuel suggested, and understand the world so I could at least try and influence it. If there was anything I knew, it was that I didn't want anyone else going through what my family went through. Things could be better. So instead of dwelling on the hellishness of reality, I poured my efforts into the cracks of light that tried to fill the darkness. Samuel was helping. He showed me a lot about his world. I showed him more of the human side of things. We talked with Goldie, and though a lot of the pack still regarded me as scum, some were changing their hearts. The pack was changing, mostly because much of Goldie's alpha responsibilities were now dispersed throughout the pack. She ran things a lot differently than Wiley had, and only a few people complained. In the end, Samuel got most of the work, but he didn't mind. It was only moments like these, when Goldie forced him to stay on the phone with her, that he wished he could run away. No, I didn't know that. Samuel paused again and shot me a glance. How rude of Will. I covered my mouth and tried not to laugh out loud. Samuel was supposed to be working now, and if Goldie knew he was with me, then neither of us would hear the end of it. I'll have Samantha try to reel him in. He listened for a few more moments, then smiled. Yes, she can. Is there anything else? Then, finally, he sighed and said, I'll see you tonight. Samuel hung up the phone and leaned back, shutting his eyes and groaning. I can't handle her. Samantha. I released my long, suppressed laugh. You're doing just fine. No, really. I think I might quit. You can't quit. I can pretend I can. Come on. You baby. I laughed again and pushed off Samuel to stand. I placed my weight on both my feet, and as soon as that happened, I went plummeting to the ground. Samuel caught me before I was buried in a mound of sand. I laughed and tucked my hair behind my ears as he stood me upright, then picked my prosthetic off the ground. Missing something. A leg, I guess. Samuel groaned. You and Marshall are going to kill me. I sat back down and allowed Samuel to refasten my missing limb. You'd have to hear us coming. I can hear just fine. Your phone's ringing again. Samuel jumped and picked his phone up, only to see a blank screen. He looked at me with tired eyes, and I almost apologized. Then, one corner of his mouth turned up and he threw my prosthetic into the sand. Without warning, he lifted me on his shoulders and carried me straight into the ocean. I was laughing and kicking his back, screaming when the cold water reached my toes. When we were deep enough, Samuel dropped me in the water without a second thought. As I surfaced, cursing him loudly, he was bent over laughing, my teeth were chattering as I searched my body for warmth. You better hope I don't get sick. Wolf boy. Samuel splashed more water on me, before picking me up and holding me close. He held me up so that our faces were only inches apart. Then, as he had done 100 times before, Samuel kissed me like there was nothing else in this world that could make him happy. Wouldn't dream of it. Sammy girl.